My name is Mitch. I'm an amateur webcomic creator looking to eventually go pro. And this is going to be the video for you if you are an inspiring webcomic creator looking to become a professional one day. Before we get started with this video, I'm just going to say that I actually started streaming here on YouTube every Friday. We streamed last week to a couple viewers. Had a lot of fun, so if you want to check it out, I'll be streaming every Friday, started around 7, or later, depending if I have to work that day. But anyway, let's get into the video. So the topic of this video is going to be quantity versus quality in terms of your artwork, in terms of your story. And we'll get to that and what it kind of means, I think, and what you should do, how it affects me, and kind of me as an artist and a writer going forward. And I'll also be talking about kind of if you kind of feel like you're stuck at the intermediate level and you want to advance into kind of an expert level, a harder difficulty, weird term analogy, I guess. But yeah, I'll kind of talk about that as well, and because I do think these two are kind of connected. If you're new to this channel, I talk about making web comics. I was working on a comic called 100 Years Later, link down in the description down below, and I'll kind of be talking about that more. I stopped making it, but it's going to be for good reasons, and you'll see why later in this video. But I'll kind of talk about points to give more general advice and not just talk about me all day. I do that a lot, and I kind of want to give more advice to help people out and inspire people. But the main topic is quantity versus quality and which one you should do. And I think it depends on where you're at in your art and webcomic career. And I've made videos saying you should put out as much as you can. If you're thinking of making a webcomic, go for it and do it. And I'll always say that. I think, if you're on the fence of you don't think you're good enough to make a webcomic, you are good enough. You need to start putting stuff out there. You need to get that quantity up. You're not always going to be satisfied with your quality of your artwork and your writing. So you kind of just need to get to the point where you can put stuff out. And if you're a beginner webcomic artist and a beginner artist, just in general, I guess, you need to be focused more on getting stuff out there, getting your work out there, just finishing projects, stuff like that. And I took that advice. I completed about 7 chapters of my comic 100 Years Later. When I first started, I wasn't a beginner. I had done other comics, but I didn't really get past, a certain point, a lot of unfinished first chapters. But I've had with 100 Years Later, there's 200, 300 panels almost. So yeah, it's quite, I wouldn't say it's super long, but I definitely got my quantity up. But and it definitely made me become an intermediate webcomic artist, and that's cool. I definitely feel comfortable to say that now, because before I was like, I don't know if I'm really intermediate. Now I'm definitely at the intermediate level for sure, low intermediate maybe. But how do I get to that next level? How do I become a professional? How do I get my work to become professional at a professional level? What do I do? And I think there's a lot of advice out there that will help you get from a beginner to an intermediate, but there's not a lot of advice to get you from an intermediate level to that next level, the professional level, the expert level of creating something. And I think it's because it's a lot of you have to do it yourself, and there's really not much people can tell you, from what I understand. And because it's you have to get a very deep knowledge that will only come through you just doing it. But I think as I try to learn how to become an expert, I'm hoping to share all the knowledge I gain and hoping to help all of other aspiring comic creators, all the other aspiring artists to become an expert. And I think right now, what you need to focus on the most is not your quantity. I think when you're a beginner, that's the main thing you need to work on. You need to get out the panels, you need to get out the chapters, you need to know you can do it. But once you get to a certain point where you think you can, it's not really a question of what you think you can, it's more of like you can finish your work, you'll put stuff out. For the longest time, I thought I just needed to keep getting faster, and you do. And I'll talk about that more later. But at the same time, you need to focus on the quality of your work. When you're in that intermediate level, you definitely need to take the time a little bit more, keep growing your skills, and taking it a little bit more slower than you might have had before. Because when I'm doing 100 Years Later, actually, I recently had gotten a new job about 2 months ago, and I actually started going full-time these past weeks. So that it's been fun. I have a lot less free time now, but I'm more financially free than I've ever been, so that's been awesome. So I'm definitely in a lot better headspace, which is definitely good for my art. But yeah, I definitely just have a lot less free time. What was happening is I set these deadlines for myself to kind of put 100 Years Later out every 2 weeks. And what kept happening is I kept just trying to draw it as fast as I can. And that's a good skill a webcomic artist needs. I definitely still think that. But that's not something I need to worry about right now. I need to worry about something. I need to worry about the quality of what I'm putting out. I'm not at a professional level, and I need to kind of upgrade my art, upgrade my writing, spend a lot more time thinking about it and actually drawing it and studying and using references and all that fun stuff to make my comic work look at like a professional level. Speed is something you worry about later. Once you are able to do it at that level, then you can start worrying about speed. So that's what I'm going to do. And the smart route, and if I had unlimited time, and if I probably didn't have to have a day job, I would probably go back and redo 100 Years Later and really take my time, try to make it look as beautiful as possible with all my new skills I've learned. Because I started 100 Years Later back in October, doing the pre-production work and stuff, maybe November, I can't remember exactly. So it's been about 6 months, and my art's grown crazy exponentially, and I've kind of kept the same art as it was 6 months ago. Whatever. So I could redo 100 Years Later. The issue is, I've said this in previous video, 100 Years Later is kind of like my practice comic. It was kind of an idea I thought of pretty much last October to kind of just do before I do my magnum opus, that one big idea. I think I've talked about that too, that I have. And again, if I had unlimited time, I would probably do 100 Years Later to get better, to make Helios, my big project, to make that even better. The issue is with my new full-time job, which I, again, am very grateful for, and, especially at this day and age, a lot of people don't even have jobs. But it's just, to do 100 Years Later, even if I were doing it with my old art style and doing it as fast as I could, it was going to take me about 2 to 3 years to finish. So now with this new approach of trying to focus more on the quality, of really making it look nice, really scrutinizing the story and the art, it would be closer to about 5 or 6. And that's fine, but I was already in pain, I guess, to I didn't want to wait that long to kind of start the story I really want to tell. So the solution is I'm just going to drop 100 years later and work on the project I really want to work on, because I think I'm at a level where I feel comfortable making that comic, which is kind of crazy because, a lot of people say, they're going to keep working until they're good enough, and then, it's kind of like a moving field goal. I hate that term, but that, that's kind of what it is. But yeah, I do think my skill as an artist and a writer, especially if I take my time and really kind of focus on it and really take it slow, is good enough to kind of portray my vision. So you kind of need to tell yourself that, or kind of figure it out, I guess. And this is a weird video. It's a very ranty video. It's kind of turning personal. I kind of meant it to be kind of generic advice, but hopefully you can get some advice from this. But yeah, I'm just gonna work on that. I'm gonna take my time. I'm gonna actually do my character sheets. That's a big advice if you're making a comic and you want your characters to look the same throughout your entire comic. Make a character sheet. I thought I was a good enough artist to get away with not having character sheets. You are not. No one's a good enough artist unless you are the greatest artist on the planet and you can just instantly draw characters. You don't need a character sheet, but you're not. No one is. Draw character sheets. I will make a whole video on it. It's advice I didn't take, and it's advice I wish I would have taken. So do your pre-production. I did very little pre-production because I was just I wanted to rush through 100 years later, and it ended up poorly. Not to say that it was a bad experience. I grew a lot as an artist. I grew a lot as a writer. And a lot of people seem to like it. I've actually gotten a lot of fan art from 100 years later, which is amazing because I have a small YouTube channel. I have the Webtoon's even smaller. The fact that people are drawing for it is mind-boggling. So I thank everyone for that. I'm probably gonna make a video on that. But yeah, I'm gonna go and make my dream comic, and it's kind of cool. And my brother, I kind of confide in him about all this kind of stuff. He said just do what you want to do. And even if 6 months from now I think of a better idea for my comic, or a better idea for a comic, that's fine if you drop it. You just need, as long as you keep getting better. Which I don't know if I necessarily agree with. I want to finish a comic. I feel bad for not finishing 100 years later, because it definitely was like just about to get started. Like it felt like that was kind of the intro arc, right? If you have read it. But I don't know. I just want to work on something a lot harder and not really kind of worry about deadlines right now. Especially since I'm doing this as a hobby. I'm doing it not to get paid. I don't expect to get any amount of money from making this comic anytime soon. So I'm just gonna kind of make it at the pace that I think is acceptable to make it look as good as possible, to make it read as good as possible. So that's what I'm gonna do. And if you're at that intermediate level, you think you're very confident, not really necessarily confident, but you're just looking on how to increase your skills even further, I would recommend doing something of the same nature I'm doing. Is, find that one comic idea you really want to tell. Maybe you're already telling it right now. Reboot it or start it, and just really take your time. Do not worry about, deadlines or whatever. Just make it. But yeah, that's everything for this video. If you're an intermediate looking to become an expert, start worrying more about your quality. If you're a beginner, you're starting, to make your webcomic, start definitely worrying more about your quantity and trying to get as many chapters as you can out there. And I've noticed there's a lot of kind of not necessarily generic advice, but a lot of advice catered towards beginner comic makers, which is definitely good because there's probably a lot more beginner comic makers than there are intermediate and expert comic makers. And I've put out a lot of advice on how to help, beginner comic makers. But as I try to grow as an intermediate comic maker to become at that expert level, I hope to make videos on how I get there and how I can help other people get there, because it's definitely hard. That's probably going to be the hardest thing in your comic making career, getting to that point. And it's a subjective level, I think, but it can be quantified, I guess, on what your own personal beliefs are of what you think is good enough. And yeah, it kind of moves. It's a moving scale, but you'll understand. You'll know once you're better. And getting better is always a good thing. And yeah, I did. It feels like I put a lot of labels with this video. But I don't really know how to make this video and kind of say which level everyone's at, because there's really not just 3 levels. There's an infinite amount of levels. Everyone's at a certain point. And someone who may think they're a beginner is probably, a super amazing comic making machine, but they don't think they are. But whatever. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a like. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And again, I'll be streaming every Friday. So come by, say hello.